I'll do a quick introduction. Martin's CIO of Shaw Stockbroking. James.
Shaw and Partners.
Shaw and Partners. Oh, sorry. James is Chief Client Officer at Clime, and Leonard is one of the lead advisors at Fitzpatricks. So he's got the real inside knowledge here. Look, the objective of this session is for it to be interactive, but we will start off with some specific questions just so we can give you a flavour of the different needs of high net worth clients. I might start with you, Martin, given you're close. But from your perspective, what have you found to be the differences of a $50 million client that you might be pitching to?
Yeah, there's a lot more $50 million clients out there than you would think. There's been a lot of wealth generated in Australia in the past decade through real estate businesses. There's a lot of what's that, Millionaire Next Door? If you haven't read Ross Allen Prince's A Millionaire Next Door, it's a little bit dated and a little bit US, but basically says there's millionaires everywhere. And it's a lot of money out there. So look, I think this is an investment focus. So rather talking about a lot of the stuff that Paddy spoke about was just the complexity that comes with larger sums of money and the three-dimensional nature of the problem. So it's not a pure risk-return outcome, which is what you typically have when you've got a retiree or someone looking to fund a retirement. That's kind of the name of the game. And you need to think about all the permutations with Centrelink and all those sorts of things. And a lot of financial planning's aimed at that, and it's really important work. But once you start getting, larger sums of money, the retirement sort of down the bottom of the list of things that needs to get done, because that's kind of almost done. And you start to get into, it's not your money, it's somebody else's, i.e. it's the kids or it's the government's, depending on how you structure things. So try to reduce the government take and try and maximise the kid take or the charitable requirement or the faith-based requirement or, the next generation or generations after that, multi-generational. So you start getting into, family trusts, testamentary trusts, philanthropic foundations, strategies, and so it becomes three-dimensional because you're thinking about tax and structures. And a lot of us have problems with two-dimensional thinking, let alone three-dimensional thinking. So it becomes really complicated, but I think your engagement's massive because to solve that, you need to really get to know the person really, really well and probably ask them questions that they hadn't thought of themselves. So this whole risk tolerance questionnaire, you need to take that to a whole new different level in terms of what they're trying to achieve with their money. So I find the first question I ask someone is, what's the money for? And you get a blank look. What do you mean, what's the money for? Aren't you just going to give me recommendations for what I should invest in? And you go, not until I understand what the money's for. So the medical profession has a phrase which is, diagnosis before prognosis is malpractice. So spend the time on the prognosis. That's really the key. And if you can really understand what the money's for, you've got a pretty good chance of coming up with an investment solution that works.
Okay, great. I might turn to you next, Leonard, but maybe James then talk about how you scale things across multiple advisors. So Leonard, from your perspective, what's the same versus different with your day-to-day experience with these clients?
Yeah, if I may just start with just giving you a snapshot on our business and how we arrived at where we are today, just to give you a flavour. We come at it from a lead advisor style, which is more around project managing clients' affairs and taking that holistic balance sheet sort of approach. So that's really, the investments one spoke of a multitude of activities that we do, and it's really educating and working with clients along the way. We have focused on high net worth individuals and using IMAs and SMAs. I guess the key differences I can bring out in my experience with that journey has been that there is a real expectation in the high net worth space that you're bringing something a little bit different that they can't access themselves in retail land. So something that's that has that sort of sexy flavour or bespoke aspect. It might be wholesale in nature. Really, gives them that sense that they're having access to something that they wouldn't normally be able to access in retail land. So And that might, come about, and I term it as sort of opportunistic type investments. It's not their whole portfolio, but a portion might be 10%, and that could be invested in, private equity, VC, private markets, alternatives. It's just really being able to meet their objectives and and investment approach. But the other key thing for me is that clients in that nature may have multiple, investment mandates across their structures. So just going to Martin's point, you're dealing with, the whole group set of assets. So you're dealing with, that they might have a PAF, they might have a self-managed super fund, they've probably got a family trust that's all, intergenerational. A lot of my work's come out of dealing with Deloitte partners and clients, and they've sort of always, protect themselves with a lot of structures. And it's about, having that protection and those barriers from creditors and predators. So, all these different structures create, a different, they have different requirements. So it's about being able to meet those requirements in an efficient way that enables you to work in the relationships with your clients rather than, being tied around, flipping paper from A to B. So that's probably been the key enabler for us has been managed accounts in that experience. But, they're probably some of the key aspects that I can draw out. And I think now, the ESG and requirements are certainly, are more prevalent, and being able to have tools in your toolkit to be able to address those is certainly becoming more topical. And, private markets are also, there's always you've got to be careful with those types of instruments. You obviously, need them. You have to apply your own DD and have investment team looking over in regards to bringing those instruments, because it only takes obviously one bad investment experience and that can, sort of, impact all the good work that you've done. So I might just pause there for a moment. Yeah.
No, that's okay. So Martin talked about complexity, you talked about structures. So James, you deal with a lot of advisors and you're sort of scaling that service across more advisors, more clients. What are some of the other considerations you're probably coaching those advisors on what to take into account, but also supporting?
I think one thing that's really important is, these people, a high net worth client, while they may have a lot more money perhaps than sort of a more typical retail client, they're still human beings and you still want to understand their needs because everyone is so different. Think about someone who's worth $20, $50 million. You have someone who scaled up and built a business from scratch, manufacturing, marketing, selling widgets. And that person's, probably satisfies the definition of being very, very successful. What they've created tens of millions of dollars in value. Now they may back themselves and want to be heavily involved and want complexity in their investments, and maybe have very ambitious goals with turning that money into hundreds of millions of dollars. But other people, we've got a client, a lady, she's about $50 million, and she's very different. For her, she came to us. She'd had a number of different advisors, and they had her in a number of less liquid, unlisted investments. And for her, that wasn't valuable. It wasn't about returns. It was about sleep at night factor. And so we're letting those roll off, and actually we've got her in quite a conservative asset allocation because that's her values, that's value for her. So it's certainly, you've still got to think about it as an individual, and I really like that question. Martin, I might steal it if that's okay. What's the money for? That's a good one to start that conversation. But I think, I saw, I can't remember if it was a podcast or a TED Talk a while ago that really stayed with me. And it started with this concept of, we hold ourselves with pride, this badge of I'm a solutions-focused individual, like that's such a positive thing. And he challenged, this speaker challenged that and said, I think you should be a problem-focused individual. Spend more time on the problem, defining the problem, understanding the problem before you seek to solve it. Because when you have that full context of what the money is for, and who the money is for, then you can start thinking about bringing the tools in. So to go back and connect it with your question, Mark, I think one of the things is access and helping that person be able to access things that maybe they couldn't get elsewhere. I think it was touched on in the sessions in here about these wholesale products, and there's a big long list because the retail world's got more lists more controls around it. So wholesale, a lot easier to launch a wholesale product. So you need that due diligence and those controls. But you can bring in, if you have a high level of due diligence, you can bring in some more interesting opportunities, but also helping them see under the hood. I'll give you an example. We had a fund recently we brought to our client base, which was an agricultural based fund, and we flew a dozen clients out to just outside Armidale, and we went and visited these greenhouses, 20-acre greenhouses or something that grew tomatoes. It's fascinating stuff. And we spent the day out there and went through these greenhouses and looked at that as a fund and a sub asset class within property. And my view was I didn't want to measure that success of that trip by how much money those 12 people put into that fund, because to me what we were doing is showing them that we can bring this broad array of product that they wouldn't be able to access outside of us. So I think that's a softer value, but I think that does matter.
Okay. I might pause for a question from the audience.
Just a quick question for you. Thank you. We just heard from the speaker earlier that 34% established affluent female. Thinking back to your lady client that you just mentioned, the 50, yep. What was it, do you think, that eventually showed that you could add value? I mean, I'm sure she had plenty of other advisors. Yeah, so how is it that you add value to someone that's very, very sort of bespoke like that?
I think it actually goes back to just asking questions and listening. The advisor who was introduced to this lady, and you're spot on, she had multiple advisors, and actually there's still another group that are managing a portion of equities because the son's married into someone, so there's a connection there. So they've still got a piece of that, but we're overseeing the whole thing. But the advisor that connected with her just has this natural ability to be very genuine, be very patient and very open. And he's an experienced advisor, he's a mature advisor, who's actually moved to this country relatively recently, so he doesn't have a broad network, but he's growing his book through the small connections he does have of really connecting with them. I know the first month he was in the office, he said to me, because I now know the name of the partner and the children of everyone that works here. Now we're his peers, his colleagues, but he did that out of real genuine interest in them. And I think that kind of gives you an insight to the type of attitude he had and how he developed his relationships. There was a gentleman he knew that was involved in a large industry body group, and he lived nearby him. And so he went on for a walk one day with his dog and just texted the guy and let him know he was walking down his street. And he happened to be home, and so they went and had a cup of coffee and developed relationships. And he's picked up referrals through that. So just genuine interest, I think, matters. It kind of blows me away, because I kind of ask myself that question too. They must just never have asked her that question and listened. That's all I can put it down to. So I made the comment inside that some of our most successful high net wealth advisors have come from a retail advice background, and they still retain that retail advice framework around holistic conversations, understanding all of you and all of your goals outside of just an asset allocation, risk and return.
I might link to that and ask Leonard a question. So James was talking about sort of a problem focus, specialist solution focus. But in your journey, how did you learn more about the problems of these high net worth clients, as opposed to what Martin said before, which is they're largely trying to optimise their retirement income, largely. Clearly, there's more problems to be had here. The more you know those problems, the better questions you can ask, the deeper you can engage. How did you learn those over the course of your career?
Yeah, look, I started off as an engineer before planning, so that was a different background to a lot of financial planners. So my background was in project management and gathering requirements and building systems. So I've taken a lot of those principles into my journey with in the advice world, and that's really to James's point in and around asking questions and listening. I mean, these are concepts that you trivialise, but listening is an important part of what we do, and it's trying to pick up on cues and partner with your clients is another way that I've learnt a lot. I deal with a lot of industry leaders, a lot of CEOs and partners of firms, and these are all smart individuals that know what they need to do. They just don't get around to doing it. It's always item 35 on the to-do list. So, being around these individuals has enabled me to see a lot of the problems and consistent types of problems, and be able to circumvent the issues before they occur. So it's just having that desire to learn, constantly learning, and always looking at each engagement with your client as an opportunity to listen to and try and go beneath the line, as we say in Fitzpatricks. It's about using your emotional intelligence tools. It's not about showing your wares in regards to investment returns. It's really about trying to get below the line and understanding who they are and what's really what are the key issues for them at that point. And by listening, I think has enabled me, and having that continual learning mindset and having a growth mindset have all contributed to that aspect. And I think just picking the pond you want to play in, and ensuring that you surround yourself with people that are in space, and constantly having that that mindset of wanting to help clients, and taking the time out to continually educate yourself around the different nuances in that. But when I reflect back on it, there's some consistent approaches and ways of dealing with things, and you start to see some patterns over time. So, but when you start off, it feels like that you're fighting fire after fire. But that starts to settle down.
Okay. Toby, you got...
Yeah, look, I've got a question about illiquid investments. And,
that's what I was going to ask, Mark.
Oh, okay. Well, me too, right?
Well, you go first.
No. I was just going to say, I imagine that people beat a path to Shaw's door with the latest greatest. How do you set a policy internally for how illiquid investments should be accommodated in this type of client's portfolio?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I made the big mistake of being quoted in a trade magazine about how difficult it was to find good alternative investors. And so I get about 7 or 8 a day from all corners of the world with all sorts of funds that do esoteric and weird wonderful things and charge you a fee and a performance fee and all that sort of stuff along the way. Look, it's becoming an increasingly important part of the high net worth, ultra high net worth offering. Shaw & Partners is an Aussie firm. We're competing with global investment banks, Morgan Stanley, LGT, etc., and they bring a lot of product to the market. And one of the things that Paddy spoke about was, how is your offering different from the competitors? And yes, having a really good advisor is absolutely key. But beyond that, what about your offering? Are you showing your clients things they can't get anywhere else? And that can be events like Shaw & Partners is like a male peacock, right? We're a tiny little body, a massive tail. We sponsor everything. We sponsor Manly Sea Eagles. We've got a hot air balloon. We do Erebus motor racing. We do Red Bull. We do paddleboarding, surf lifesaving. We sponsor everything because if your clients are into that, they absolutely love it, right? If you've got a petrol-led client, they would love to go to see the supercars, for example. So, or the F1, that's a little bit harder to get into that one. Ultra high net worth. But coming back to the question about illiquid investments, it's really like we all want to be like the Yale Foundation, or we want to be like the Harvard Foundation, and we want to have, or the Future Fund, and we want to have 25 to 30% of our money in unlisted assets, because there's a free lunch of, because you only value it every 12 months, it doesn't have volatility, and therefore you can dial up the risk in the rest of your portfolio and still be under your future, your super thing, right? It's a free lunch if you never value the asset, right? It doesn't go up or down if you don't value it, right? So people have been suckered into that to some extent. and they want that in their portfolio as well. So we don't have a rule, Toby, on you can't have this much liquidity or that much liquidity, but certainly as part of the fact find, it's, going, what's the money for? If there isn't 10 or 20 or 50-year money, can we get a premium on the illiquidity? Can we buy a private equity manager? And they're all coming to the market like KKR, Hamilton Lane, Partners Group. You can all buy them off the shelf now, but there's more and more structures all the time. So we don't have a limit. It really is client dependent, but I think every ultra high net worth offer now has to have a wholesale piece, and Shaw and Partners are no different. We've got a wholesale offer that ultra high net worths can go into, and we show them a menu of opportunities in that unlisted space.
Who do you source them from? Some degree, the execution for the audience might be, okay, that sounds good, I need to do one of those. Who do I go to?
Yeah,
who do you source
we're not
them
exclusive with anyone. We do deal with Ironbark. They have quite a lot of product. Global Alternative Funds, I think Natasha Nankiville's group. We also source some through EFG, so the Swiss bank that is the owner of Shaw and Partners. They have, they've got 350 private bankers globally, so there's product through that as well. Obviously, in the structured products, there's heaps of offers there, UBS, Citibank, et cetera. So there's a pretty broad church of offers that we use.
Any questions, David?
Yeah, just I'm intrigued. I know in Patrick's presentation, and we've heard elsewhere that he started off by saying that a lot of the high net worth clients are interested in cash flow and capital preservation. We've also heard a lot today about, oh no, they want something exotic, something other people can't get. They want the platinum offering. Just wondering, how is it just different clients, or how do you offset those two things?
I think in the best interest to you, that's how do you prioritise the conflicting objectives?
Yeah, I think it's the bucketing type approach is going to be really powerful to do that. And talking about scenarios, again, that sort of good question of Martin's, who's the money for, what's it for, breaking it down. It feeds obviously into the liquid exposure as well. My head always thinks of that rough 20% of, up to 20% of less liquid assets. But then you might think about, well, do you want to create some sort of ladder there so it's over time, so that it's not all locked in for 7 years or something like that, which can obviously, and that can be extended as well. So I think it really just comes down to knowing the purpose, but also bring to life for the client. So often clients don't understand. It's hard for us as humans, I think, to picture, what does it feel like in a GFC? What does it feel like? We forget fear and negative emotions and pain. So going through scenarios and looking at their age, looking at their family, looking at their needs, and going, if this happened, how would you feel? If this happened, how would you feel? And be very specific with the scenarios and helping them decide and steer the asset allocation between things like yield and capital preservation and less liquid assets, etc.
Okay. I might turn to an open question here, which is how do you balance those objectives across the different structures? So I think Martin, you may well have different ways of owning different things in different structures for different benefits. You want to talk to that, because just you may well have different investment objectives for a company versus a trust, but at the same time that probably speaks to David's question around how does that then play into the overall objectives for the client?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think advisors are, it's a very good investment of your time thinking about structures that you invest in, as well as what you're investing in, and obviously the government's always tinkering with how much you can put in, different structures, and you got this Part 100A thing with trusts, and there's a lot of complexity in there. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm aware of it, and I think investment professionals need to be aware of all the tax issues. So with for people, it's mostly maxing out the family house, the ultimate tax-free investment. Maxing out the family house, putting assets that can be geared if you want gearing as part of your strategy. So a lot of people think, you don't have gearing once you reach a certain amount of money, but, anyone who's studied capital markets will understand that there is an optimal level of gearing for a company and an optimal level of gearing for an individual. So can you use gearing? Can you use other people's money? If you're doing real estate investments, for example, where is that asset sitting? Is the interest tax deductible if it's structured properly? Are you maxing out your self-managed super? You're getting up to 3 million per family member. Are you then looking at, family trusts, testamentary trusts, charitable giving? So we're seeing a lot of philanthropists put a lot of money into charitable trusts. So we just saw Twiggy Forrest, I think, put $5 billion into Mirandu. So that's probably a super high net worth client, nice one to have. But if you want to develop your philanthropic side of your enterprise, there's a structured giving process around that again can use some of the government's money to help fund that as well. So I think it's worth, if you can, spending the time understanding the client objectives through the what is the money for question, and then using these different tax structures. We're huge fans of imputation credits. You get imputation credits on hybrid fixed income. You get imputation credits on Aussie equities. It's a free lunch. Like diversification, it's a free lunch. It's about 1.5% extra return on Aussie equities every year. So make sure they're in a structure where they can get used and maximised. So there's a lot of thinking you can do just before you even start picking stocks and investments about where to put things to maximise their after-tax benefit to the client.
Okay. We've probably got time for one last question before we change to the next group. Anyone leaning forward? I do have one last question. All right, well, I'll ask the question. It's more, so we spoke about structures. We spoke a lot about engaging clients and their needs, but maybe to James or Leonard, how do you explain illiquidity versus really, I think one of you spoke about 90% being in a managed account. That's largely liquid. So how do you explain illiquidity to this type of client base?
Yeah, look, it's a really important point to emphasise with clients, the illiquid nature of underlying investment, and I think it falls into their overall strategy, and ultimately, the high net worth have generally got capital at play for long periods of time, 20 plus years, and understanding that that there is a role that illiquid instruments can play, and as long as you're getting a liquidity premium, but you need to ensure that there's no need for that capital, and so that might be a bucketing strategy, or just preserving that aspect of their investments, that there's no need to draw on that capital. It might be there, but there might be a 7 or 5 year window to access it, but there is certainly an underlying liquidity consideration. It needs to be really addressed carefully with clients, because we've all been through times of stress where people want their money, and irrespective of what the underlying instrument is, and we've seen the property trusts and illiquid, the mortgage trust, and all these instruments that lock up during times of stress because of the fact that people want their money irrespective of what the liquidity constraints are. So as an advisor, it's so important to emphasise the illiquid nature of the investment and the terms, and what the withdrawal, and the fact that they can change, but emphasise that they don't need access to all their capital at any one point in time. So it's just an education piece, but I think there has to be a premium there for the underlying investor. There's no point, taking a liquid investment, at the same, the same criteria as another one. So it's really about bringing something, and it needs to be uncorrelated. In my view, I think, they need to be an uncorrelated return stream, so that they ultimately are getting something that can help smooth out their ride.
Okay, great. Folks, that's the end of that session. Round of applause for Martin, James and Leonard. Thank you.